So then it's the same.
Nice to see some new faces here this afternoon that I haven't seen this morning or yesterday. Welcome to the 6th Annual Source Song Festival. For the first time, Source Song has sponsored a conversation that specifically wanted to invite folks from the literary community to talk with us and explore this, have a conversation about how text or poetry gets paired with song. Am I okay? Mm-hmm. My name is Marg Walker. I'm a poet, I'm an ensemble singer, and also a member of the Source Song Board. I'm really happy that you're joining us today. We chose a Walt Whitman quote as the title of this panel: "To the perfect shape comes common ground." And I think of that common ground as the place where the poem and song meet, a really porous border between the two, where the human voice dwells. Patricia Kirkpatrick, there you are. A local poet, teacher, lovely person, has helped our little group put this panel together, so I acknowledge that. Thank you. And also just to invite you all, this is the coveted late afternoon time slot. If people are tired of sitting, just stand. If you can't see very well because we're not, on a platform here, just move. It's fine. We want you to feel comfortable this afternoon. We're going to do a couple things. The first part of our session is to have a panel discussion with a couple of poets, a couple of composers, and I'll introduce them in a moment, to talk about how that creative process works, that a poem and a song find each other and become some new work of art that is merged. And then we'll take a little stretch break, and then we'll hear the performance of two really written pieces for the purposes of demoing this idea. How do you take one text? How might two composers approach the same text and do something, I'm told, completely different with it? So we'll do that in the second part of our conversation, and also invite you during that second part to say, what did you hear? What did you notice? Those of you who are involved in the creation and performance of music, and those of you who are just lovers of words and of music, we'll be really interested to hear how people received those new works. And we'll talk a little bit more about where art song might be heading. And then we'll also want to invite you to stick around if you can. We're having a little reception afterwards because we're just pretty pumped to have the literature part of things taken a closer look at today. So let's get underway. Oh, but I have to say too, definitely stay for the reception to chat a little bit more and be in conversation with one another. If at all possible, come tonight to the Whitman concert. The Whitman concert. It's a beautifully curated evening with works that are all from a variety of composers that all use Whitman text. So it'll be quite a fascinating evening, and we'd love to have you stay for that as well.
Tickets available at the door.
Tickets available at the door. We are delighted to welcome 4 panelists who are wonderful artists in their own right and who have also had the experience of either setting poetry or having poetry set. So we'll hear from both sides of that equation today. Starting down here, we have Carol Barnett. Her music includes works for solo voice, piano, chorus, diverse chamber ensembles, orchestra, and wind ensemble. It's been featured at festivals, won international prizes, and has been performed at Carnegie Hall. Recent works include My People Are Rising for Electra Women's Choir, Longing for Home, a song sample for Source Song Festival, and Home Is for the Nova Singers. Carol was composer in residence with the Del Orland Singers from 1992 to 2001 and was on the adjunct faculty at Augsburg College from 2000 to 2015. Liam Moore, to my immediate left, is a composer, baritone, and lover of language. He primarily writes choral music, chamber music, and art song. Liam was a participant in the inaugural Source Song Festival in 2014 and was one of 4 selected for the 2015 Vocal Lessons Remix program. His music received 2nd place at the 2018 Sparks and Wiry Cries Minneapolis Song Slam, and earlier this summer he attended Art Song Lab in Vancouver. So you're kind of all over art songs. In addition to singing and composing, Liam claims that he generally plays stringed instruments well and the trombone quite poorly. Liam lives in St. Paul and is currently finishing a chamber pop album. Joyce Sutphen grew up on a farm in Stearns County, Minnesota. Her first collection of poems, Straight Out of You, won the New Women's Poets Prize. New Women Poets Prize. What? It's hard. It is. Since then, she has published 7 more, 2 of which were finalists, and 1 of which won the Minnesota Book Award for poetry. Her latest collection, The Greenhouse, was published by Salmon Press in Ireland in 2017. Joyce is the 2nd Minnesota Poet Laureate. That's why her name is familiar and her face maybe too, succeeding Robert Bly. And she is Professor Emeritus of Literature and Creative Writing at Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, Minnesota. And Michael Dennis Brown, the author of 9 volumes of poetry. As a librettist, Michael has written many texts for music, working principally with Stephen Paulus for almost 4 decades. Their collaboration include Pilgrim's Hymn, The Road Home, and To Be Certain of the Dawn, a post-Holocaust oratorio nominated for the Pulitzer Prize in Music. He is co-librettist for Craig Hella Johnson's fusion oratorio, Considering Matthew Shepard. In 2020, Carnegie Mellon University Press will publish Build Me a Boat, Words for Music, 1968 to 2018. Michael is Professor Emeritus at the University of Minnesota, where he taught for 39 years. So a lot of experience and a lot of depth here on the panel today. Welcome to all 4 of you, and thank you so much for agreeing to join us for this conversation. Carol, I'd like to start with you if I could. I am aware that some people in the room may not be familiar really with how a poem finds its way to a composer and into song, and I wonder if you could just give us a little bit of a 101 on that from your experience or those you know.
How to find a text.
Yes.
Basically. When I start looking for a text, I'm always thinking about who's going to sing it, and if possible, I get suggestions from them, because the whole point in finding a text is to narrow the possibility. There's this whole marvelous wide world of texts from, before Sappho on to 2019. And what you need to do is say to yourself, in restraint, discipline is freedom, or something like that. So try and narrow your field. Who's singing, what's the occasion, and what would the commissioner like in terms of a text. I love when the person who asks me to write a piece for them says, and I love this particular poem, or I like this era of poetry, or I hate poetry, said something in prose, or something. And then of course, unless this is your very first project, you probably have also got a pile of rejects from previous projects that you loved, but nobody else did at that point. So you start going through those and go through your library and start culling, hoping that something talks to you. You send them to your commissioner or your performer and say, what do you think? And they might, you basically just work it down and focus, and that's how I find the text.
This thing kept blinking at me, so never mind. Do you have anything to add to that, Liam? How do you go about finding the text?
So that is the best answer. Especially the note on finding freedom in restraint. I think is really, really great. I have a running Word document of texts to set. If all else fails, I'll turn to that.
I'm curious about, you mentioned specifically, Carol, that when you have someone who's asked you to write a piece of work, do you ever, as composers, run around with musical figures in your head and thoughts about something you just love to compose a piece about X? And does it happen that way too? And that you maybe do you ever stumble across or seek poetry or text that might help you further your musical ideas and perhaps turn itself into song?
Not very often. I do find texts that I love and that have no use at the present moment. And So I put them in my I love it pile, and 20 years later, sometimes the opportunity arises. That's a real joy. Sometimes, yes, I hear motives, but I'm not very successful as a songwriter, I think. And that the musical motive will say to me, these words go with this particular snatch of music. I admire those who are. What about you, Nina?
Yeah, I lead a secret double life outside of classical music, in which I
That's the trombone part, right?
well, it's the chamber pop part, where I often will find myself setting my own text in more popular styles. Or sometimes I will set, kind of flipping that on its head, I will also set existing texts in a popular style. But if I'm maybe writing a song and if I'm writing a song that's not in the art song world or choral music or something related to this realm, I have the liberty of saying, well, maybe I'll just do it myself. It's not good necessarily, but I mean, but it's an option. The option is there, and sometimes if I use my own text for a classical setting, I won't tell anybody it's mine.
Why is that?
Because I'm a composer, and I think that because there's such a history, it's baked into the culture of classical music that there's this separation of if I'm setting my own text, it is less than if I were to take an existing poem. And so I masked that fact by using pseudonym. And I stole that from Libby, actually.
Is there a therapist in the room? That is really interesting to hear you say that. I also wanted to ask, because I was curious about when you might write your own text, either of you, or other composers in the room, if you've had occasion to say, I have a particular thing in mind, and I don't know how to find it. It's pre-existing. I'm going to write it. I mean, does that happen more than we poets would like to think? That we haven't provided you with what you need? Anybody? What do you think?
Sometimes, I mean, I would say more often than not, there is such a wealth of texts that exist that I'm hard pressed to find something I don't need. If I'm in need, I'm hard pressed to not find something.
Got it. It's
You
there.
get me.
It's there for you. Okay.
Yeah, there are texts out there. It's a question of how well read are you, how widely are you connected, how long have you been looking? Yes, there is always the perfect text. It's just, can you find it?
Yeah, as I've been getting to know the art song world a little bit, I've been struck with how many composers have said to me, boy, I start with text. I find something that I love, and it blossoms from there. And so maintaining, as you referenced, having a library of things, this is news to me that was part of how over time resources make themselves available to composers. I wanted to ask if there's even possible to answer, I don't know, but what qualities you look for in a poem? Does that depend entirely on the music that you're trying to write, or is there some way to say what you look for?
Often I'm not even looking for a text to say when a text finds me, you could say. If you spend enough time reading poetry or reading anything, things will come to you, and they will hop into your catalog of to do. Right? Of course, if you're asked to write something, that's a different story. And you opening up a dialogue with whoever you're working with is the first step, obviously, in trying to figure out to come to an agreement of what the character of the text might be.
When you're asked to write, you mean when something is commissioned
Right.
for you, and you're accepting that commission, you're working with the commissioning agent or person to determine, or with a poet, which is, or both?
A performer is what I had in mind,
Performer.
but working with a
Got it.
poet is an entirely different beast.
Let's talk about that too.
I mean, maybe a poet's doing something, or do you don't want to get to them yet?
Well, no, I mean, in a moment, but I'm thinking about just how that process works. So if someone, you received a commission to develop, either of you, received a commission to develop some work, and you know that you need certain kinds of poetry, you're looking for that. Is there, are you then in conversation with your commissioner to say, what is it that you're looking for? What are the parameters of this piece? And that would guide to some degree what you're selecting.
Oh, yes, in the best of all possible worlds. In the best of all possible worlds, your commissioner will say, you know, I have these 2 or 3 pieces, poems or poets, that I've been interested in having set. Do you like any of these? And I'm thinking, yes, thank you. Because it sort of cuts down the composing time by about almost half sometimes. I spend a lot of time trying to find the perfect poem, or text, shall we say.
Yes.
And that in itself is sort of a misnomer, because to find a perfect poem is not always to find the perfect text. Some texts, some poems are so wonderful all by themselves that to mess with them and try and add to them is almost sacrilegious to me. And so I put those in my inspiration on my inspiration shelf, and then go to the A- variety, which is really, I mean, they're still wonderful poems, but you can actually add something to them, something maybe a more depth, emphasizing the depth of the emotion, the mood, the geographical location, something that you can add. It's not already there just by reading the text.
Wholeheartedly agree. Recently got the chance to work with a poet, and she sent me, the first text she sent me, I had this reaction where it was, this is already music. And she was writing it with the intention of it to be said. So thinking about it, she had music at the forefront. And for me it was, I could set this text, but it wouldn't do it any good. It's already what it needs to be. Not that, poems need to be anything more, or any art that exists needs to be anything more than it already is, but there wasn't much of an opportunity for me to put myself into it.
Yeah, and then this is a separate discussion, but we actually touched on it in the last panel, which Libby was saying she was asked to set some, to work with Whitman, and said, this is not text I can work with. And I guess you're kind of saying this, the opposite thing, or the same thing, but from the other point of view. It's gorgeous the way it is, and I don't know what I can do to make it better. Well, let's shift a little bit to the other side of the equation about where the poetry comes from. And I wanted to start by asking Joyce. I know that you've had a number of poems set, and could you just describe for us how that came about?
Okay, I think I should use this. Is it working?
It's fine.
Okay. That is a mystery many times to me, and but I think I'm learning a lot today. And I at the moment I'm just developing a thesis about why composers would like to use lyric compact poems of their own choice, and I can think of just so many reasons. Because I like very much all the uses people have made of poems, and often my response is yes, you can use it. I'm so happy. I can't wait to hear what what you do. But with no words, and I'd really like to know why Robert Frost got so mad. I don't, does anybody know?
You're a good poet, but a bad person. That's a quote. Lawrence Thompson. Wow.
Okay, solved.
But I love it, and from the composer's side, for certain things, I can see that there's a poem, and it is what you love, and you already know you love it. You don't know that if you tell me to write 14 lines for you, it will be what you can work with. But and then I thought of how much faster it would go, how much you didn't have to pay the commission that usually I would think, and then if you wanted to make a suite, or however the musical term would be for a group of poems together, and say you were using all of Michael's poems, and you could kind of pick and choose and arrange them, and you'd have them all like having beautiful fabric already there for you to work with. And so I'm learning about that. I don't know if I know exactly which poem was set first of mine, and I'm not even sure what year. But I'm all those things have been kind of pulled out of my email. I'm making it online, and I know that it was a commission, but it was a commission that allowed the composer to use "Living in the Body," one of my poems that ends up being set to music, set to video, sculpture, a dance, and it, and that poem has been very, very good to me. And I sat outside the Cup of Joe little bistro next to Hungry Mind on a fall day, September 2nd, 1992, and wrote that poem. It just wrote itself. So it was already wanted to be in the world. But over the years, there's been lots of uses, and I'm kind of hoping I will find out why today.
Can you just say a word about what it felt like to turn your poem or poems over to another artist, an artist in another medium?
I had no qualms about that. I really admire musicians, and even dabbled in various things, piano, and then saxophone in high school. I kind of came late and loved that. And I should say that I typed some of my first poems on Philip Welter's typewriter in his office in the band room at my high school. So they're kind of already, pals. And then I tried to learn violin when my 3 daughters were taking Suzuki lessons, and I could never get my left hand to move very well. And it's really interesting. I have Parkinson's now, and that explains it. I mean, I was like, why can't I, on this hand I can, move my hand rapidly, but I can't on the left side, but I never thought anything about it. So I come from a family of musicians, and I think I'm already going on too long. Okay.
I like the notion you have of your poetry being pals with music when it was emerging from you. And I think that's the case for a lot of writers would maybe say that same, for lyric poetry and so on. I would like to ask you, Michael, I know you've had a number of poems set, but you've also, speaking of that, of pals, been asked to write specifically for new work. And could you talk a little bit about how writing for song, for music is different, if it's different, than writing for the page.
Sure. Just to say, it's nice to be with you all. This is very good company we're in. I wrote an essay, a short essay called Words for Music. And I'll give you the opening image of that, which is this. Writing words for music is like building a boat, not a house. You build it strong, buoyant, so when the music comes, it will lift the words. If you build too heavy, like a house, it'll just flood. And I also say there that most words for music, without the music, are about as interesting as boats on sand. Because they're not in the element they were built for. Now, I do have a book coming up next year, which is 50 years worth of my lyrics. I'm calling it Build Me a Boat. You should probably call it Boats on Sand, shouldn't you? But you do build lighter. Lots of room, lots of spaciousness, lots of room for the composer. And in our yard in Minneapolis, we have a nice little cottonwood tree that sheds twigs and branches sometimes if you're not careful. A libretto, even a lyric, is like a cottonwood. It sheds a lot because the composer says, I can't possibly set that stanza. Or could you say this word or not that word? Every text of music is provisional. You're going to launch it toward the composer. And then sometimes you have quite severe negotiations about what works or what doesn't work or what should be included or not included. But it's a wonderful reciprocity. It's a wonderful dance. For me as a non-musician, though my dad was a wonderful amateur musician, I take the greatest joy in writing words for music. It's a great privilege. And what it does is it takes your words, and I don't mean your words in a kind of chest-beating way, into places that poetry can't go, into concert halls and rooms like this, and temples and synagogues, vast audiences. If I publish a book of poems, which I do occasionally, I don't know how many printings, how many copies, 2,000 or 3,000. But with a piece like The Road Home or Pilgrim's Hymn with Stephen Paul's, we talk about hundreds of thousands of copies. And it goes into people's lives. And it's done at graduations and wakes and weddings and baptisms and all those things. So I have loved writing for music because it's opened me up in all kinds of ways. Working with Steve was extraordinary. Working with Craig now. If you don't know Considering Matthew Shepard, go listen to that. It's wonderful. Wonderful new piece. If anybody's from the Chicago area, it'll be at the Ravinia Festival, September the 12th. It's a great work. I'm rambling, aren't I? We're okay to ramble, aren't we? Yeah. So it's a great privilege. It gives you a whole other kind of, what I call a different kind of belonging. I love poetry. It's my first love. But with music, it's just a different kind of belonging. And I love working with musicians. I love the improvisation that's involved. You have to be improvisatory to be a writer of anything, but also writing words for music. There's a critic called Alfred Alvarez who once described the poetry. You know what? I mentioned the name of a critic. I mentioned the name of a critic. He once described the poetry of D.H. Lawrence. If you don't know Lawrence, he's one of the great poets in English of the 20th century. He described Lawrence's poems as improvisations at the full pitch of his intelligence. It's wonderful. So I love the hazardous improvisatory collaborations that one has. Now, Stephen and I survived in early days a lot of difficulty. We didn't know how to do it. But it's like a partnership or a marriage. You get used to it, Dad. You have compromises. I forget the question now. That's what I have to say.
Thank you. I wanted to say, too, that I've heard poets and composers talk about how, and as a poet, I'll just say, I write something, I know it's on the page. I hope people will do more than have their eyes scan it. I want it to be read aloud when someone encounters that text. But when I hear it sung, then it's even more embodied. It's the, a singer requires the whole body as the instrument, and it becomes a much more sensual and sensory experience, I think, when it's brought into the world in that way. So I think it's, your boat is lifted off the water, but it also is lifted in the body and much more physical and experience, which I think is really thrilling for certain kinds of poems. I want to, let's see, there's so many interesting questions. Let me ask anyone on the panel, thinking about different genres of music, or if that's even the right way to think about it. Is there a difference in your view between a poem, I'll say a poem rather than, do I say text, that's suitable for art song versus music? How do you think about that?
Let's see if we can make this work without squawking. I think it may be one of voice, that if you've got a good text for an art song, it's almost by definition more personal. There's one person singing it, perhaps one person accompanying it, whereas in a chorus setting, you've got more people. And it just doesn't feel quite right to me to set a very personal love song for a chorus. Short answer.
That's such a good question that I have actually been thinking about recently. I have never been able to put it into words, and I'll continue to try to do so. Carol, you write a lot of choral music, right? So she's got a lot more of an idea of this thing. But definitely something about the character of a poem will speak to me through a different medium. Another kind of interesting aspect of it is one of accompaniment, and if you're going to set a text for choir, is it an unaccompanied choir? Is it a piano and choir? Is it a chamber ensemble, orchestra? And I think all of those pieces can sometimes be found in the text itself, but I have no real way of articulating that. And I think it's interesting about the Frostiana, that sometimes, especially with like an unaccompanied piece for choir, you can use these elements like repetition, and that Frost hated. But they are tools that we use as composers to flesh out a musical idea, or to focus our attention on a specific word or phrase or line, right? And with unaccompanied choir, there's nothing else, right? It's just voices. We don't often see a lot of solo voice, purely solo voice, right? On Monday we got to hear 2 solo voices, which was nice. But it's obviously much more common to hear unaccompanied choir, which is just voices, but we can use the repetition of text will buoy the music itself, because there's nothing else, right? There's no instruments to support them, so sometimes repetition is there to carry us through. And so maybe a shorter text will lend itself to, I personally, I guess I will find that I will set a shorter text for choir rather than a longer text. That's it.
One of the things I've talked with a couple of friends who write for song, and what especially one of them was saying is, I think about what this sounds like as a singer. What does it feel like in the mouth? Can it be pronounced? What are the vowels? So all of those qualities become very important to this particular writer as he's thinking about a song. And I think in those cases, talking with the composer about what is it that you envision, what kind of, is it a solo voice, is it a choral piece, helps. As a amateur singer myself, I would say there are things that I can get away with in a choral setting that I could not as a soloist, right? In terms of pronunciation, where it is in my range. So I'm beginning to think about that question a little bit in writing. You know, what does the end, what does the poem, what do the words sound like? I was writing one poem, for example, that the line ended with the word enough, and I thought, no, that could not be sung. I would not ask somebody to sing a line ending, you know, have you had enough? It's a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea. So I think that there is that kind of sensitivity to it, just the sounds and the vowel structure and the rhythms of the language. I don't know though, I'm so inexperienced, and maybe you have a different take on that.
Could I? So I mean, I'm sitting here saying, I probably could do that, but, you know, you'd have to say, you've had enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a question.
I need to have more faith in the composer figuring it out.
You have to, you know, play with it a little bit. That's a fun challenge, actually.
I kind of lost track of the question, but I want to share another quote with you. I always love quotes that help me. And it came from John Harbison, and it exactly correlates with my own experience. He said once, or wrote once, that I get my main idea down fast. I have a sense of the world of sound I want for the piece. But then I spend months finding out what my ear wants. And for me, that's true. I'm working on some stuff now for Craig, and I'm really struggling to hear vowels, among other things, rhythms. I can have a clever idea, but it's dead if it doesn't sound. And so for me, a lot of pieces that seem spontaneous took a year or two and 2 or 3 dozen drafts as I gradually found out what my ear wanted.
And you taught me that because Michael's my only teacher formally, and all the other poems that I've memorized because of your example, and sound is very important to me as a poet. The poems that I love have, well, for instance, listen to this. We cannot know his legendary head with eyes like ripening fruit, and yet this is kind of crazy. I've forgotten a line that I know better than my own name. Well, never mind that for the minute. There are so many sounds that I love, and when I write, I'm saying everything out loud, as I write, listening to that sound, and I also pay attention to meter and form a lot, and I wonder if that might be attractive to composers, or it ends up being, even if it doesn't seem completely obvious at the time. I mean, so I always try to make it so that it isn't obvious. But so anyway, we cannot know his legendary head with eyes like ripening fruit, and yet his torso is still suffused with brilliance from within, like a lamp in which his gaze, now turned to low, gleams in all its power. Or children picking up our bones will never know that these were once as quick as foxes on the hill. I mean, just children picking up our bones. I mean, I don't even know what that's called exactly in metrical. I could scan it, but you know what I mean. It's just that kind of is really important. And you said that to me back in the day in like about 1980. And you said you are more connected to music than visual arts, even though I love painting too. So,
That's very interesting discussion.
I just have a question for poets in general. If you're ever writing poetry strictly for the page and not to be heard, Is that a thing?
That's definitely a thing.
Is writing for the page the thing?
Oh, I'm sorry, it's not the
It's a pointed question.
Oh, not to be heard.
Not to be heard, not necessarily to be heard, not that it won't ever be heard, but
I can't imagine that you wouldn't want the aura of sound around the piece. I don't think I've ever tried to do that. I'll go home and try.
we'll get the full report.
Yeah. I've been thinking too about this idea that we've been touching on here about what can music add to a poem, what can text add to music. I sometimes think that one of the most interesting things for writers is to think about what's unspoken versus spoken, what is sayable and not sayable. I think sometimes writers, I'll say poets, write right up to the edge of language, beyond which language can't express the idea. And that's where I would hope to pass the torch to a musician to say, what else can I do with this to amplify the meaning or enrich it or make it something even more? But I don't know. I mean, so there are different views about this apparently.
Well, it's like going to a beautiful place on a vacation and taking a picture. And you know that here's about 90 degrees or maybe 102 or something. But behind you and around you and above and below is so much more. And your photograph is not going to catch that. But music can catch some of that. And that's the way it enhances the text.
Music is able to provide a context that may not have been intended for a poem, but will provide one nonetheless. Music, in my mind, and in many, is the most abstract of arts. It's completely intangible. There is abstract painting and writing, but music inherently is abstract. We cannot tie it to anything. It is not directly correlated to any emotions, to any intellectual, any concepts, right? We can't tie a note to a concept. We can't tie a phrase to a concept. We can try, and we have programmatic music. It's been done for centuries, and we can tie emotions. We can say, oh, this major chord is happy, but of course, that's not reality, right? It's a simultaneous sounding of notes. It is, right? Yeah. So there are things that we can do with music that will evoke things that are hinted at in the text, or to tease out things that might exist in the text, but it's so subjective, right? Where all art is subjective, but I don't know. In music we can really play with it because it's whatever you want it to be.
But in music, we're very often working with pre-existing sounds and emotions that are evoked by pre-existing sounds. And if we then reference those sounds, then that is in itself an evocation of what we want our setting to be of this particular text, or whatever text, I think. If we make it sound like Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, the first movement, then it's going to sound major, it's going to sound in F, it sounds like we're walking through a lovely forest and the brook is babbling. That's what we've done with our music. It's sort of a bald example, but if you reference the sounds that you heard at your wedding, for instance, that will, you hope, make something in your listener's mind. It's an interesting and very slippery thing to do, because of course everybody has their own set of nostalgic recollections, but it's reference to culture. And you hope that you have enough common ground in the sonic culture to contact with your listeners.
Yeah, that is huge, and you can take a scale, right? That the dominant Phrygian, and all of a sudden you're transported to Northern Africa, or and some of this is appropriation, of course, but we can do these things to, yeah, absolutely reference. There's so many layers that can be built into a piece of music through just referencing things we know about songs that exist or sounds that we've heard. Yeah, but it is cultural. It is completely culturally based. Yeah.
I'd like to shift gears just a little bit to make sure we cover some of the nuts and bolts of how the process actually works. And two things. One, I do want to talk about a collaborative endeavor between two artists that are creating new work, new text, and new music at the same time. But first, I want to talk about a composer wanting to use an existing poem. It's a living poet. How does that, what sorts of agreements need to be made? What sort are there negotiations? Are there, we were talking in the earlier panel about, how did you put it, needing it to be verbatim exactly as the poet wished, or do you need to seek permission if you want to do something different? Could any of you speak to that just for a moment?
Find the poet and ask, and get permission. Sometimes the poet will say, ask my publisher, so then you do that, but it's always necessary to ask and get permission. Legally it is, but also to make that sort of connection as much as you can to the other part of the art.
Stay away from devilish publishers. There are some notorious publishing houses in New York and elsewhere who will charge such absurd fees that the pieces will never get set to music. Or someone like John Berryman, great Minnesota poet, Minnesota bass poet. A lot of his poems don't make it into certain anthologies because Farrar, Straus, and Giroux want too much money. So that's one issue, the money. The other thing is, it's all negotiation. I mean, you've got to be flexible. The composer wants to repeat a word, or bring something back, or take something out, remove a stanza, move something around. But I always think that the successful setting of a text in mind is it's a whole new creation. It's a gorgeous opportunity for the reader and the listener to imagine in new ways. Excuse me. And there's everything to be gained by being flexible, by having good negotiations, by not having an attorney, and so forth. Is that part of it?
It's definitely part of it, and I think the other thing we're hinting at is relationship, right? So that it's, so if at all possible, when at all possible, meet each other, chat about it, say, what do you want to do with this, and calm down about defensiveness. Quite apart from the legal angle, but just to build an understanding with one another.
I don't know if you always want to meet. Charles Bukowski, who is this wild California poet, has a wonderful poem, and he says, you know, if you find a writer, a contemporary writer living in your time, who you're just crazy about, be sure not to try and meet them. Because it'd be usually a real letdown. They're not some juicy, godlike person. They're, you know, mean-spirited people. So I don't think you have to meet the person. Often, not to be cynical, but sometimes it's a bad idea.
I stand corrected. No, that's a very interesting point, yeah. I think I'm mostly saying open the door and be willing to talk it through and make sure that you understand what your agreement is, whether it's in writing, which I would recommend, or not, at least to have that understanding. Yes.
There's nothing better than hearing one of your poems that's now become a song for a chorus or something, and knowing the audience got that poem in a way that they never got it before. And, or they laughed at the last line, which nobody ever did at poetry reading.
let's talk also just for a few minutes about the collaborative process when a work is commissioned and a composer and a librettist or poet are trying to work together. Could you just reflect on some of your experiences in that vein? Any of you?
Michael's done so much of that.
But I've been talking
Let's bicker. Who goes first?
I would say you're working towards a common goal, right? So understanding each other, understanding each other's work style, and understanding what the outcome is, right? So through compromise if necessary, right? But mostly I think by just getting to know the art, getting to know what you're both creating together, I guess. And often it's the poet will make the work and then the composer will take it. But there is sometimes back and forth. Like we were mentioning, can you change this word possibly to not squat? Because nobody wants to sing squat, even though it's a wonderful word.
You've got to kick your ego out.
Yes.
Yes.
When you're working, there has to be an aura, there has to be a simpatico feeling. It's a partnership, marriage, whatever you want to call it. And if you're standing in your own turf, beating your own chest and saying, these are my words and these can't be altered, or that isn't right, you should take up a different profession. You know?
I think that you hit on a really good point, which is to, at the very beginning, define your common goal. If you can't get to that point, then don't continue.
I've heard of some different work styles too in the collaboration. You may understand one another pretty well, general idea, common goal. And then in some cases it's, okay, writer, go create something for me, give it to me, I'll react to it, give it back to you, and now do something different. Let me discuss it for sure, but then the writer, so that the writer is continually trying to adapt and figure it out. And in one case I heard of a composer saying, here's what I'm thinking about, and hammering it out on the piano, and does this trigger something for the poet? So that was to me news that it could happen that way. I mean, I suppose there's variation though in how that collaboration, the process of it itself works.
Yeah, you don't want to get too far before you both realize that it's, you don't want to, as a composer, I don't want to get too far before the poet's like, yeah, I don't want this to happen at all. And it's like, well, this is all I've been doing for the last couple of weeks, so great. Yeah, so checking in is great, I think, just to make sure that you are on the right path and that the music you're writing actually is, that the poet likes it. And, the great thing about working with dead poets.
No pushback, right?
They don't have to like it, but that's not as much fun, right? Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Joyce. Please.
No, all I was going to add was, how does it happen in the movies? I think that would be a good little program for next year. Films that have composers, and those composers, someone falls in love with the composer as they're, working at the piano, and they come up and start singing. Just an idea.
I'm glad you mentioned singers, because that is the final piece. But in the preparation of a piece, like whether it's choral or an art song, is there some collaboration that continues? I think we touched on this in the prior panel, but when it's coming to the performance stage, having the opportunity for writer and composer and performers to be in the same room and workshop it a little bit, is that a common practice?
I wouldn't say it's common, but it does happen. I was just in Vancouver for this thing called Art Song Lab, where that unicorn of an experience does happen. And I was in the room with the performers, with the poet I was working with, and we were all making it as good as it could be together. And it was sublime. And I would say probably not something that happens all too often.
No, what usually happens is that you collaborate with the text writer, you write, you go back and forth, and then you present it to the performer, and they say, fine, let me learn it. So they learn it, and you get to listen to it probably too far into the process, because the performers are not all that secure about not being judged. You know, they think they need to be perfect before they sing it to us, which is, I so treasured my years with the Dale Levin Singers, because I got to sit in on all of the rehearsals. And if I wrote a piece for them, the only stricture was that I could not say anything at the first rehearsal, because they were learning it. After that, anything was fair game, and that was a great educational experience. And so I would advocate for those of you who are performers in the room and who have commissioned something to involve the composer and the librettist, the text writer, earlier in the process, just to get some information as to if you're on the right track, and perhaps they are able to give you a little bit more of a depth of what they were trying to do. It all works to the best performance.
Keeping things malleable to the last possible time, or last possible moment. We're going to take a break in a couple of minutes. If there's any burning question or some insight someone would like to share. Yes?
Have you written music in theater as text or form? If you sat down and composed a song that you believe Joyce came out of you, maybe there's something for this.
I have not. I know
The question was, have you ever, go ahead, Carol.
has the music come first, and then you loved the music and said, "Ooh, this needs words," and written it. I haven't, but it works. I know people who have, and songwriters often do that, I think, as far as I can understand from having read about that.
I would have more experience with that probably. After talking about my secret double dark life, I'm the mild-mannered alter ego. I've done it before. Often, if I'm not taking a text and setting it, more often than applying text to music that exists already, they are both happening simultaneously, in a sense. So writing the music will inform the text, will inform the music.
Thank you. We are going to take a break, and I'll add that there'll be time for more questions and interchange in our second part of the program. This is a short break, probably 10 minutes. It's 4 o'clock right now. And after that, we will be hearing the 2 premieres of pieces that were written for this afternoon, and we'll have a chance to talk about them and much more. So I want to especially thank our panelists for agreeing to come. Thank you for the creative work that you do in the world. We appreciate it. All right, we'll reconvene in 10 minutes.